All right, so today we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit. We're going to be talking about New York City after 9/11.
Hmm.
You know, we all know about the tragedy itself.
Yeah.
The images are seared into our collective memories.
Hmm.
But what about the years that followed? You know, it's a story of rebuilding,
Yeah.
resilience, and some pretty intense debates
Right.
about what the city should become.
Yeah, you're right. It wasn't just about like putting the bricks and mortar back together.
Yeah.
It was about rebuilding like a sense of identity, like a sense of normalcy
Mm-hmm.
in a world that had really just shifted on its axis. And our source for this deep dive is an interview with the editors of the book New York After 9/11.
Okay.
And it really gets into like the nitty-gritty of
Yeah.
this whole process.
So before we get too deep into that, what's the first thing that pops into your head
Hmm.
when you think about New York City post 9/11?
Oh, gosh.
I'll admit, for me, it's that image of the skyline
Right.
without the Twin Towers.
Yeah, that's a powerful image for
Yeah.
sure. But what's often overlooked, I think, is the sheer speed and scale of that initial recovery effort.
Yeah.
The source actually mentions that like physical debris removal
Wow.
was completed by March 2002,
That's incredible.
just 5 months after the attacks.
Yeah. When you think about the mountains of twisted metal and concrete
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
that we saw in the news.
It really speaks to the collective will of the city, the nation, even the world.
Yeah.
Thousands of volunteers flocked to Ground Zero working around the clock alongside first responders.
Mm-hmm.
Don Wildman, who's one of the interviewees,
Okay.
describes witnessing the scene firsthand. He calls it a Pearl Harbor of a scene,
Wow.
just utter devastation.
Yeah.
But amidst the chaos, there was this overwhelming sense of purpose,
Right.
this need to do something, anything to help.
Yeah. I remember those stories of everyday people driving from all over the country just to lend a hand.
Exactly.
It really felt like this massive shared grief was being channeled into action.
Yeah.
But as we know, beneath that initial surge of unity,
There were also some pretty significant oversights, particularly when it came to the health fallout.
yeah, this is where the story gets really complex. The source highlights this tragic lack of protection for the people working on the pile, as they called it.
Right.
No masks, hardly any safety precautions at all.
Wow.
It wasn't until later that the true danger of that toxic air became widely known.
And to think that the EPA initially claimed the site was safe,
I know.
that's a tough pill to swallow, especially knowing what we know now about the long-term health consequences.
Yeah, it really underscores how, even in the face of such immense tragedy,
Right.
misinformation and the underestimation of risks can have a profound and lasting impact.
For sure.
We're talking about potentially 400,000 people
Wow.
exposed to those toxins, including children.
400,000 people.
Yeah.
That's just staggering.
And the long-term health impacts are still being uncovered.
And I imagine the mental and emotional toll was just as significant.
Absolutely. PTSD, anxiety, survivor's guilt.
These invisible wounds became a part of the city's recovery, a hidden epidemic in a way.
Yeah.
And even today, there are still ongoing struggles for proper health registries,
Right.
a recognition of certain illnesses, particularly for women, as 9/11 related.
You know, it's almost like there were these two parallel recoveries happening.
Yeah.
One very public and focused on rebuilding the physical space,
Hmm.
and another much quieter one,
Yeah.
focused on these invisible wounds that would linger for years to come.
That's a great point.
Yeah,
And it speaks to a larger question. How do you rebuild a sense of safety and well-being
right.
in a city that has just experienced such a profound trauma? How do
Exactly.
you balance the need for security with the preservation of civil liberties? And perhaps even more fundamentally, how do you decide what rises from the ashes
Right.
of such a symbolic space?
That's what I find so fascinating about the rebuilding of Ground Zero. It
Well,
wasn't just about bricks and mortar.
Right.
It was about these clashing visions for the future.
Exactly.
About what this space should represent.
Yeah.
Who gets to decide? You had the city, the state, the Port Authority, the leaseholder of the World Trade Center complex, Larry Silverstein,
Right.
who had ironically signed the lease just 6 weeks before the attacks.
Wow.
You had victims' families, architects, developers, and everyday New Yorkers, all
Yep.
with their own ideas about what should happen next.
And those visions, as the source points out, were often at odds.
Yeah.
Some advocated for a purely sacred space,
Okay.
a memorial dedicated to remembrance and reflection. Others pushed for a return to commercial vibrancy, a symbol of New York City's economic resilience.
It seems like such a delicate balance to strike.
Yeah.
How do you honor the victims and the enormity of the loss
Right.
while also acknowledging the city's need to move forward, to rebuild, to function?
Exactly. And that tension, that struggle to reconcile those competing desires,
Right.
played out in some very public and often heated debates.
Like the controversies surrounding the proposed Cordoba House, right?
Right.
It was originally intended to be this multi-faith community center, just a few blocks from Ground Zero.
Right.
But it quickly became a lightning rod
Yeah.
for all sorts of political and social anxieties.
This is where we really see how fear and prejudice can hijack even the most well-intentioned plans.
Right.
The source describes how the Cordoba House, which was meant to be this symbol of interfaith understanding,
Yeah.
was quickly misrepresented in the media and by certain political figures as a ground zero mosque,
Right.
which fueled a firestorm of opposition.
It's a reminder that even in a city as diverse as New York, those deeper societal fault lines can be exposed and exploited in times of crisis.
Exactly.
So what happened? Did they end up building the Cordoba House?
Unfortunately, no. Despite the efforts of its supporters to clarify its purpose and mission,
Right.
the project was ultimately abandoned due to the overwhelming pressure
Wow.
and the very real threats of violence directed at those involved.
Oh, God.
It was eventually replaced by luxury condos, a stark reminder of how fear and prejudice can sometimes triumph over inclusivity and understanding.
It's almost like a microcosm of the broader challenges that the city and really the country was facing at that time. Trying to figure out how to rebuild, how to heal, how to move forward in a world that felt suddenly much less certain, much less safe.
And that brings us to the physical manifestation of those anxieties, the rebuilding of Ground Zero itself.
Right.
How do you fill a void that holds so much symbolic weight, so much grief, so much hope?
Yeah.
The memorial and the Freedom Tower that eventually emerged tell a very complex story, one that reflects both the city's resilience and its internal struggles.
Yeah, I'm really curious to hear more about that, about the design choices, the symbolism, the impact on the surrounding community.
Yeah.
It's one thing to see pictures of the rebuilt World Trade Center complex,
Right.
but it's another thing entirely to understand the layers of meaning and emotion embedded in that space.
And that's what we'll delve into next.
Okay.
Exploring how the physical rebuilding of Ground Zero reflects a much deeper process of grappling with lost memory. And the very idea of what it means to be New York City in a post-9/11 world.
Okay.
So
all right,
let's take a quick break.
Yeah.
And we'll come back and dive into that.
All right. Yeah, it's interesting how you frame that, like, feeling a void.
Right.
It really does feel like the absence of the Twin Towers created this, like, physical and emotional vacuum that everyone was just trying to figure out how to fill.
And the design of the memorial itself, I think, really speaks to that sense of absence of loss.
Okay.
The two massive reflecting pools set within the footprints of the towers.
Right.
The water cascading down into this seemingly bottomless void.
Yeah.
The names of the nearly 3,000 victims etched in bronze around the edges. It's incredibly powerful.
I haven't had a chance to visit the museum yet.
Okay.
But everyone I know who has been says it's like a really profound experience. They managed to find that balance between commemoration and education without being overly sensationalized.
It's a difficult line to walk, for sure.
Yeah.
But the memorial itself seems to have resonated with people.
Right.
It's a place for quiet reflection, for remembering, for grappling with the enormity of what happened. The Freedom Tower, on the other hand, has sparked a bit more debate.
Yes, the Freedom Tower. I remember all the talk about its symbolic height, 1,776 feet.
Right.
A nod to the year of American independence.
Right.
But I've also heard some criticisms about the design.
Yeah, some people find it a bit, well, sterile.
Okay.
A little too corporate, maybe. It's this massive glassy skyscraper that, according to some critics, lacks that organic, gritty feel of classic New York architecture. Don Wildman in the interview actually says it looks like it's trying too hard.
Trying too hard. That's a pretty good way to put it. It's like they were so focused on making the statement of strength and resilience that they forgot about the human element.
Yeah.
That sense of imperfection and character that makes New York City so unique. I mean, it's not an ugly building by any means.
No.
But it doesn't quite have that same emotional resonance
right.
as the memorial itself does it.
That's a good observation.
Yeah.
And it highlights this key challenge in rebuilding after such a traumatic event.
Okay.
How do you create something new
right.
that honors the past
right.
without feeling forced or inauthentic?
Yeah.
Sometimes the most powerful gestures are the ones that emerge organically from the community, not the ones imposed from the top down.
Yeah. You know, speaking of the community, it's fascinating to see how Lower Manhattan itself has transformed since 9/11.
Yeah.
I remember it being primarily a financial district, all suits and briefcases.
Yeah.
But now it feels so much more vibrant, more residential.
Right. That shift is one of the more unexpected outcomes of the rebuilding process.
Yeah. Okay.
The source mentions that Lower Manhattan now has twice as many residents as it did pre-9/11. It's become a destination for young professionals, families, artists, entrepreneurs. There are more restaurants, shops, and cultural venues.
Yeah.
It still has that Wall Street vibe, but it's now mixed with this more bohemian creative energy.
So in a way, that initial debate about whether to prioritize commercial space or create a purely memorial space kind of resolved itself organically.
Yeah.
Life, as they say, finds a way. But I imagine this influx of new residents also brought its own set of challenges, right?
Absolutely. One of the biggest concerns is gentrification.
Ah, right. Gentrification. I've heard that term thrown around a lot. But to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what it means.
Essentially, gentrification is the process of renovating and improving a neighborhood in a way that attracts wealthier residents, often displacing lower-income residents, and changing the character of the area.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So while the rebuilding of Lower Manhattan brought about this exciting new energy, it also came at a cost for some of the people who had called it home for years.
Exactly. And it raises some important questions.
Yeah.
About who benefits from urban renewal projects.
Right.
And how we can ensure that development is equitable and inclusive rather than leading to displacement and further marginalization of certain community.
It seems like this theme of unintended consequences keeps popping up.
Yeah.
As we unpack the aftermath of 9/11, like with the health fallout, the debates over the Cordoba House, and now gentrification, it's a reminder that even when we're trying to do the right thing to rebuild, to create a better future, we need to be mindful of the potential ripple effects.
Yeah.
Those unintended outcomes that can sometimes do more harm than good.
That's such an important point.
Yeah.
And it leads us to another aspect of the post-9/11 world that's fraught with these kinds of complexities and ethical dilemmas. The issue of security versus civil liberties.
Right.
How do you balance the need to protect a city from future attacks with the rights and freedoms that are fundamental to a democratic society?
That's a question we're still grappling with today, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Especially with all the advancements in surveillance technology and the ongoing threat of terrorism.
It's a balancing act. And the source reveals this particularly troubling example of how that balance can be tipped in the name of security. The NYPD, in the years following 9/11, engaged in widespread surveillance of the Muslim community.
Right.
Infiltrating mosques, student groups, even restaurants and cafes.
Yeah.
They were essentially spying on people, based solely on their religion or ethnicity.
That's just chilling to think that in New York City, a place known for its diversity and tolerance, people were being targeted simply for practicing their faith or having a certain cultural background. It feels like such a betrayal of the city's values.
Right. And what's even more disturbing is that, according to the source, all that surveillance didn't actually uncover anything substantial.
Wow.
No terrorist plots were thwarted. No arrests were made. It was essentially this massive invasion of privacy that created an atmosphere of fear and suspicion within the Muslim community without any real security benefits.
That's heartbreaking. And it makes you wonder, what was the real motivation behind these tactics? Was it truly about preventing terrorism?
Yeah.
Or was there something else at play, something deeper?
Right.
And perhaps more sinister?
It's a question worth exploring further, and it speaks to the importance of critical thinking and questioning those in power.
Right.
Even when they claim to be acting in the best interests of public safety. Because sometimes the most dangerous threats to our freedoms come from within, from those who exploit fear and prejudice to justify overreach and control.
It's like that old saying, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance.
Exactly.
We can't just assume that our rights will always be protected.
Right.
We have to be active participants in safeguarding them.
Yeah.
Challenging policies that erode those freedoms and holding those in power accountable.
Absolutely. And this brings us back to the heart of this deep dive.
Okay.
How did 9/11 reshape not just the physical landscape of New York City, but also its identity, its soul? How did it impact the lives of everyday New Yorkers, their sense of safety, their relationships with each other, their very understanding of what it means to live in a globalized world, where these kinds of events are sadly a possibility?
It's a lot to unpack, but I think it's important to remember that the story of New York after 9/11 isn't just a story of loss and tragedy. It's also a story of resilience, of community, of the enduring human spirit.
Yeah.
And it's a story that's still being written day by day.
Absolutely.
The New Yorkers continue to grapple with the legacy of that day and work to build a future that honors the past while embracing the possibility of a brighter tomorrow. It's interesting, as we've been having this conversation, I've been thinking about how 9/11 has become this sort of cultural touchstone, a lens through which we view so many other events, whether it's the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the rise of surveillance technologies, or even just our own personal anxieties and fears.
It's true.
Yeah.
That day cast a long shadow, and its ripple effects are still being felt in countless ways.
Yeah.
But amidst all the darkness and the challenges, I think there are also glimmers of hope, stories of resilience and renewal that are important to acknowledge.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, New York City itself is a testament to that resilience.
Absolutely.
Despite the immense loss and trauma, the city rebuilt, adapted, and in many ways came back even stronger.
It's more than just bouncing back, though.
Right.
It's about finding a way to integrate those experiences, those scars, into the fabric of who we are, both individually and collectively.
Right.
It's about acknowledging the pain and the loss, while also recognizing the strength and the spirit of community that emerged in the aftermath.
And that process of integration of meaning-making can take so many different forms, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's not just about building memorials or museums, although those are certainly important.
Absolutely. It can be through art, music, storytelling, activism.
Yeah.
Or simply connecting with others who share those experiences.
Right.
It's about finding ways to process the trauma, to make sense of what happened, and to use those experiences to fuel positive change.
And sometimes it's just about those everyday acts of kindness and resilience, those small moments that remind us of our shared humanity, of the good that still exists in the world, even in the face of tragedy.
You know, the source doesn't explicitly mention this, but I think it's worth reflecting on.
Okay.
The incredible outpouring of generosity and compassion that followed 9/11.
Yeah.
People from all walks of life, from all over the world, stepped up to help, to donate, to volunteer, to simply offer a shoulder to cry on.
Yeah.
It was a powerful reminder that even in our darkest moments, we have the capacity for incredible love and empathy.
It's like Mr. Rogers always said, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping.
That's a great quote. And it's so true.
Yeah.
Even in the midst of chaos and fear, there are always those who choose to act with compassion and courage.
Right.
And those acts, no matter how small they may seem, can have a ripple effect, inspiring others.
Right.
And creating a wave of positivity that can spread far and wide.
It makes you realize that we all have the power to be those helpers, to make a difference in the world, even in the face of overwhelming challenges. It's not about grand gestures or heroic feats.
Right.
It's about those small everyday choices we make to be kind, to be compassionate, to stand up for what's right.
Yeah.
To offer support to those in need.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most enduring legacies of 9/11.
Right.
That it awakened in many of us a deeper sense of our interconnectedness, of the importance of community, and of the power of collective action.
It's like we were all forced to confront our own mortality, our own vulnerability. And in doing so, we realized that we're all in this together. We need each other.
Yeah.
And that realization, I think, has the potential to fuel a more compassionate, more empathetic, more just world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into New York after 9/11, we'll leave you with this thought. What's one small thing you can do today in your own life, in your own community, to embody that spirit of resilience, compassion, and hope.
It could be checking in on a neighbor, donating to a cause you care about, volunteering your time, or simply being a little kinder and more understanding in your interactions with others.
Remember, even the smallest acts can create ripples that extend far beyond ourselves.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I want to thank you, dear listener, for joining us on this journey.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
If you're hungry for more, we highly recommend checking out the book New York After 9/11. It's a rich and insightful exploration of the city's long and complex recovery process.
It is.
And as always, we encourage you to continue exploring, continue questioning, and continue engaging with the world around you.
Absolutely.
Because the more we learn, the more we connect, the more we understand, the better equipped we'll be to create a future where tragedies like 9/11, while never forgotten, are no longer the defining moments of our time.
That's a powerful thought to end on.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay hopeful.